Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, episode number 29. I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda, and we're your hosts.
Yes, and we are back together, reunited.
We've had a bit of separation anxiety. It's been a tough 2 weeks, but we're back, rekindled our friendship, and we're ready to podcast.
Yeah, you sound super excited about it.
I'm stoked.
So today we're going to be talking about fear. And the reason is because I wrote something and posted it on our website, theworldwanderers.com, about overcoming your fears and how traveling helps you to do that and just get more comfortable overcoming your fears over time. Because overcoming fears isn't a one-time thing. It's not like you're afraid of heights and you jump off a tall building, bungee jumping.
I was like, well, that could be a one-time thing. You'd probably die.
Yeah, if you just jumped straight off the building, you would overcome that fear. You'd also be dead, though. But it's like, the point I'm trying to get across is that, like, it's a habit you build, this habit of not respecting that internal fear thing unless it matches up with reality. And that's something we talked about before in prepping for this, about how people are afraid of things, and it's kind of this instinctual inner fear in their bodies. They have a stress reaction. Oh, I don't want to do that. But it doesn't really match up with reality, because fear should be based on risk. There should be some risk involved, and that's why you're afraid of it. Like, as an evolutionary thing, fear exists because people who are afraid of risks were more likely to survive. So you should be afraid of risk. But a lot of times we're not afraid of risk. We're afraid of things that really don't have any downside.
Yeah, and I think that plays in with social situations, things in school when we're young, the way we're brought up as children. We just kind of develop these fears over time of things that don't actually have risks associated with them.
Well, and I would say during like our formative years, I feel awkward saying that, but like when you're a child or when you're at school, there are risks associated with, like, stepping out of line in your home might mean punishment from your parents, and like physical abuse, verbal abuse. Stepping out of line at school amongst your peer group means isolation. You know, you get abandoned by your friends. It's like really terrifying, and there is some actual risk there, but then you step out beyond that, out of your childhood home, out of your high school, and then those risks aren't there anymore, but we're still responsive to this idea of being afraid of authority, being afraid of abandonment and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that.
So how does travel help you to start to realize those fears aren't justified?
Well, something having to do with fear, a quote that I really love that I shared with you while we were prepping, but I'll share with our listening audience. I was going to say our listeners, and then it just didn't come out right. Is life begins at the edge of your comfort zone. And I think that that's super applicable to traveling, because oftentimes when you're traveling, you're completely out of your comfort zone the entire time. And for me personally, I felt like I've really been living the most in the moments where I've been traveling. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like a couple different things that are resonating with me. There's the idea that, like, when you're doing the same thing over and over again, you're very much on autopilot, and that's when you're inside your comfort zone. I think you can still be in your comfort zone and do something that you don't do all the time, and then kind of have a bit of that deeper experience. But yeah, when you get really outside your comfort zone, I feel like your senses heighten. You're really seeing things. You're really experiencing moments. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when you're traveling and you, for example, you step off of a bus that's been completely terrifying in a country where you don't speak the language and the culture is different from your own, and then you're being like yelled at and accosted by multiple different people. And then, you know, you have all these different sounds and sights that you're trying to take in, and you're trying to think about, you know, one thing, like I need to get my bag and then I need to get to my hostel, and you have to process all these things. Like it's overwhelming and it's scary and it's uncomfortable. but it pushes you in a way that helps you to grow so much as a person.
Yeah. And I think that growth is, or a lot of it's happening because when you step out of your comfort zone, it's not that you're leaving your comfort zone, it's that you're expanding your comfort zone. And so when you're traveling, one of the things that happens is that when you're at home and someone asks you, oh, what are you afraid of? Common responses are heights, maybe like driving,
spiders,
skiing, something like that. But there's a lot of things that you don't really realize you're afraid of because they're not in your day-to-day life, versus when you go, I don't know, somewhere like Colombia or Thailand, there's the fears that you didn't really realize are there that are now present. Like you're afraid for your safety. You're afraid of eating at restaurants without good food hygiene, which isn't really a big concern in North America. But it becomes like a very big concern. Getting sick, you're afraid of that. Even getting from town to town in some less developed countries is sketchy. Like you go to the bus station, you've got to hang on to your bags, and getting across the street, for example, in Vietnam and Thailand, that was a little bit scary, out of our comfort zones for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think we talked about this in our first podcast about Southeast Asia when we were in Bangkok. I mean, for us, just getting out of the tourist area and successfully crossing a road and eating at a restaurant was such a huge win. Like, it was like, wow, I just feel so awesome right now because I did that. It's the little things become those things that you're so afraid of. And it's so, those little accomplishments become big wins.
Yeah. And I think it's just a process of you building trust in yourself. Does that make sense? I think when you're like, as a human, you're kind of functioning best when you really believe in your ability to meet any challenge that you might face. So for me, even just going to places like Thailand and Colombia and Bolivia, it kind of gives me faith in my ability to travel almost anywhere. And it kind of makes the world seem like a bit of a less scary place.
Yeah, that resonates with me a ton. I mean, I wanted to go to Southeast Asia so much before we went, but it was super scary for me. Being uncertain of what something is like is something that terrifies me. Like the idea of like a new job, first day of school, meeting new people on a tour, walking into a hostel, not knowing people, like those sorts of little things scare me. And so having those small things day to day in a third world country and just overcoming those little things, it really helped me to change my perspective in terms of I can do anything that I want to do.
Well, I guess it just gives you a little bit of something to relate to. For example, I remember like starting a new job recently and walking to work, it felt like me going into like an exam in university, just this like anxiety and like having something to relate it to, of just like, okay, yeah, I felt this feeling before. It's going to be fine.
Yeah.
Because it's hard, like it's easy to say, oh, what's the downside risk? Well, there really isn't any. But that doesn't, I think when you can identify with that and understand that, but it doesn't really help you continue to act in the face of it that much. Like it doesn't make the fear go away or the anxiety go away. Like realizing that there's no downside risk doesn't stop your unconscious from continuing to be stressed because it's not a consciously thinking, I guess. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of just this habit you have to build of your unconscious. You're stressed and it's not something to be stressed about. So you act in the face of that stress, and then over time it's going to go away.
Yeah, and the more you do something like that and push yourself to face those fears, like the easier it becomes.
Mm-hmm. So like when you were talking about how you really wanted to go to Southeast Asia, and just for anyone who's not too sure of what that situation was like, we did 3 months traveling in Europe before we went to Southeast Asia. And you really wanted to go, but I was really uncertain about it. I had some friends who had gone, but for me, it was a scary place to think about. I had never been outside of like first world countries. So I was hesitant. And I think it's pretty safe to say if you hadn't really wanted to go, if you hadn't pushed me, I don't think I would have gone. And then I probably wouldn't have even gone to South America this past time, because I think going to South America, there is some nervousness because all you hear in the media is bad stories about people getting kidnapped in Colombia or other places like that. So for me, knowing that all that stuff is just bullshit and I'd been to Southeast Asia, it was fine. I could go to South America and I'd be fine too.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing that's super scary about traveling is the idea of being like getting hurt or being sick. And you and I were both sick in Southeast Asia. I mean, you particularly, you were very ill. And I think you knew that, okay, like I can overcome this. So if I get sick in South America, like it's fine. Like I'll be okay.
Yeah. It's funny too, with being sick at the time, it just feels like the world's going to end. And then afterwards, you don't really remember it. I remember thinking that when we were in Southeast Asia, like there's a lot of uncomfortableness about Southeast Asia, and I was pretty happy to not be there anymore. But you don't really remember those negative times and the feeling like, oh man, I just want like to be in an air-conditioned building or a country that's not humid. I want like solid plumbing. I want
I was just to not say, like a porcelain toilet bowl.
Yeah, a toilet that actually
shit my pants out.
A toilet that actually flushes.
Yeah,
but like you don't remember those things, and that's why I think it gets like everyone is like, oh, Thailand amazing, but like there was a lot of not so fun experiences there.
Oh, 100%. I mean, before we went tubing in Laos, I ate something that did not sit so well, and I had to run to the bathroom like 3 times, slipping through mud. I'm like squatting over a hole in the ground. Just, you know, it's like that's the type of thing that is something that would hold me back or would have held me back from traveling. But it's, you know, I've had that happen to me and it was fine. It's not when I tell somebody about that day. That's not something I tell people. That would be like an afterthought. It's like, oh, I guess it was kind of a downside that I was a bit sick beforehand, but like it was fine. And it was. Yeah.
And I think like we were talking earlier about building trust in yourself. So I think being sick is scary for a lot of people, me included, because at points in time, I haven't had a really strong level of trust in myself. I've kind of felt like, oh, I don't know if something's seriously wrong. I don't know. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe I'm dying. I don't know. And you kind of have to have this trust in yourself that you're going to know if you need to go to a hospital, you're going to know.
Yeah, for sure. And I fell while we were in Colombia and sprained my ankle really badly. And there was a while where it wasn't healing well. And I mean, that isn't part of not going to a doctor and not taking care of it the way I should have. And being like, what if I like ruin my ankle forever? And, you know, what if it's broken and I'm walking on it and I'm doing serious damage to my leg? And all these things are running through my head. Like, do I need to go home? Like, what's happening? Have I really hurt myself? Instead of just trusting my body. Like, if my ankle was hurt to the point where I shouldn't have been walking on it at all, my body would tell me that.
Yeah.
And just trusting in yourself that you're going to know that about yourself.
Yeah, it seems like so much of being hurt and being sick is just about anxiety. And then getting over your sickness or injury is just actually overcoming the anxiety versus actually getting better. You just have to stop panicking that something's seriously wrong, start thinking that you're okay, and then you'll be fine. That's almost like the issue.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's easier said than done.
Oh, absolutely.
For sure. Like both you and I have been in that position of having that anxiety.
And that's why I think you go through those periods of having that anxiety and then you're fine. And that's why I think travel's such a good thing, because it puts you into those situations more often. Whereas at home, you're living a comfortable life. You're really not pushed to the edges of your comfort zone. But just to like bring up one example of thinking of kind of like an anxious situation, we were in Jamaica and we were just taking locals buses to try to save money, and we were walking on the street in Montego Bay, and like all these like tourist police people are like, oh, you know, don't go into the actual town, don't go into town, like multiple people. And we were like, I don't know why they're trying to like scare us, but it's like nighttime, we can't find the bus we're supposed to be on. Eventually we do get on it, and we're like, I'm stressing out, at least. I think it's safe to say we were, about like, oh, are we going to find our stop? Once we get off our stop, are we going to make it back to the place we're actually staying at, because it's a while out of town, and all these things. And in the moment, it's like you're really scared of what could happen if you're going to be safe. And then afterwards, you look back on it and you're like, that wasn't dangerous at all.
Piece of cake. Walk in the park.
Yeah. So the next time you get in a situation like that, you have more faith that, okay, no matter what happens, I'll be fine. Like if someone does mug us, we'll give them our stuff. It'll be fine.
Yeah. And it's kind of putting that into perspective. You know, I have like the equivalent of 20 Canadian dollars on me and a camera, which like, yeah, it sucks if somebody takes my camera, but at the end of the day, it's a camera.
Yeah.
My life is going to continue without that camera, and I'll be fine.
Yeah. And I think that's like, we kind of touched on it earlier about really trying to move fear to be something that's in line with the risks involved. And so losing your camera in terms of big life risks, like how afraid of losing your camera should you be? Probably not very.
Yeah.
Versus, you know, oh, I'm not even going to leave the resort because I'm afraid of losing my camera.
Yeah, I mean, if you're that afraid, leave your camera at home. I mean, I guess.
Yeah, and just don't be that afraid. I think, like, if we lived in a society or a world where people didn't act on fear so much and weren't so afraid of things that weren't really that risky, how often would you be afraid in your life? Like, when's the last time your life was threatened?
Like I can't even think of something like truly threatened. Like basically never in my whole life has my life been truly threatened.
Yeah, so like life should be so free of fear, but it's like probably the dominant emotion that everyone experiences. Yeah,
for sure. And on that note, another huge fear that you and I have both overcome through travel is social anxiety in social situations.
Yeah.
I think that's a big one for a lot of people. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Yeah, it's funny. Just before talking about this, we were talking about a social situation that you didn't really want to get involved in, and just about how if you had to say this thing to a person, how afraid of it would you be, versus if you saw, like, we're walking down the street and saw a bear, like we're in the mountains here in Canada, like there are bears around. So encountering a bear on the street's not like, you know, out of the realm of possibilities. And you're like, oh, I'd be more scared to tell that person something. And it's like the bear could actually kill you, but you're so afraid of the social situation. But like, I wouldn't exactly the same way.
Yeah, for sure. And that's in the context of, you know, telling somebody something pretty truthfully that, you know, I have the fear that it might hurt their feelings. And then another thing is like fear, like first day of school, that whole, like, how do I do my hair? How do I do my makeup? What do I wear? What are people going to think of me? And that is something that completely crosses my mind entering a hostel dorm room. It's this like fear of meeting new people and this fear of social situations and how do I act and how do I behave? And
so it's like the fear of being ostracized from the group?
I guess so, which is it's a dumb fear, like straight up. I mean, it's something that most people live with, but it's not something that people should be living with. I think one thing that travel has helped me with that is that everyone is so different from like around the world, and you get into this hostel room and people don't care what you're wearing. They don't care what your hair looks like. They don't care. Like there's just no care there. Like they're interested in who you are, and that's all.
Sometimes they don't even care about that.
Yeah, that's true, actually. Maybe they just want a good like travel tip. What's a good cafe you were at?
Mm-hmm.
Like people just don't care about that. I think for me, like coming back from South America, I had a group interview for my first interview for work, and then I had a one-on-one interview. And after being in so many sort of uncomfortable social situations through traveling, I was really able to just go in and just be like, I've got nothing to lose here, because if these people don't like me, they're not going to hire me. And that's fine, because I don't want to be hired somewhere where people don't like me for who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like that job is not meant for me if they're like, you know, you're not a good fit with this company. Like, I'm sure there's somewhere else you'll be great. That's fine. But it's getting over that fear of how do I act? What do I look like? What do I wear?
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
I think it's the interviewing example, I think, is a good one about like when you go in for a job interview, a lot of people really do this like me plus routine. Like, oh, what's your biggest weakness? Like, oh, I'm a perfectionist. And stuff like that, where you have to pretend to be something you're not to get this job. And when you think about it, it's like, why would you want a job that you have to be pretending to be something you're not? But that's kind of beside the point I want to make, is that I think people do that all the time. It's just not as extreme as the job interview thing. Like when you're associating with people, you're kind of putting on this act to be what they want to see, at least for a lot of people. And then I think that makes more sense in a context of being at home. You're around the same people all the time. So there's people who have more utility for you. So if you can be pleasing those people with more utility, you can get some benefit out of it, but there's no point in acting to please people who you've met one time in a hostel and are never going to see again in your life. If you're only seeing people in passing over and over and over again, eventually that habit of like not being yourself, you just kind of lose it naturally, I think. And it's also, if you're conscious of it, have so many possibilities for interactions that you can really move past it quite quickly.
Yeah, definitely. How have you felt that traveling has impacted your like fears of social interactions or your social anxiety?
Well, I think the general example I was just giving about being afraid of pleasing people, like that was my experience.
Okay.
We went traveling for the first time, and I was like quite shy. The only times I'd really express myself was when I was drunk. And so going into an environment of hostels was a bit uncomfortable for me. Like I guess I kind of look at it like I didn't have the social skills and needed to practice them. And so someone comes into the dorm room and I'm like, oh, should I say hi? Am I assertive? Do I introduce myself? Because I was kind of afraid of taking those emotional risks to just say, hi, I'm Ryan. What do you do? Like, I don't want to start the conversation. I'd always try to like play it cool.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think it's just, interaction after interaction after interaction after interaction, you build this habit of caring less about what other people think about you, worrying less about their perception of you, and just being more interested in that person and being more interested in making a connection with the people who are in your room so that you feel more like safe and secure.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that kind of links back to the point that we were talking about, how every time you act in the face of the fear that you have, it becomes easier to do it again. That's like every new hostel dorm that you and I walk into, it's like we can both face that social anxiety. And, you can be assertive to the point where you're just like, somebody walked in, like they're probably feeling uncomfortable. Let's just break the ice right now. Like, I'm Ryan, I'm from Canada. What's your name?
Yeah. And I think it's funny because there's like that generic hostile small talk of like, where have you been? Where are you from? And I think a lot of people kind of say negative things about it to try, but like they don't really offer other solutions. It's like, oh, I'm so tired of hostile small talk. But I think it's, I remember when we were doing our Machu Picchu trek, someone we were trekking with kind of changed my perspective on it, where I was like, oh, I don't really want to just be doing the same small talk. And I was just using that as an excuse not to talk at all.
Yeah.
Sure, if you don't want to do small talk, ask people deep questions right off the bat. Like, that's cool. But people don't do that. So I think it's just kind of the step you take. You know, where are you from? Where have you been? What do you think about this thing? And then you can get into some deeper issues. But it is kind of the pathway to those deeper issues. And if you're confident enough to just skip that small talk, all the power to you. And I'd like to be there one day. But
that person who just like walks up, shakes your hand and says like,
do you believe in God?
I was just, what's the meaning of life?
Yeah, what's the meaning of life? Those kind of questions.
What's your deepest desire?
Because I think that's really where you connect with people, and you really get to see who people are. I don't know that much about you because you're born in X town or because you've been to, you know, Arequipa. That doesn't tell me anything about you. But it's weird how like that's all we need to know. It's like, oh, you know, I know this person. They've been here, here, and here. Versus like, oh, I know this person. Like this is what they believe in. Like they live their life ethically because of this. Like,
yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's stepping into a realm of being very vulnerable. Like putting yourself out there and opening yourself up to other people's opinions and perhaps their criticism and, you know, maybe judgments, and just being okay that you've opened that door.
Yeah. And so that's conquering a fear. Being vulnerable is kind of conquering this fear of people not liking who you truly are.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of touches on something from before about when you're having interactions with the same people over and over again, I think there's some more risk there in being vulnerable because you're going to have to continue associating with these people. So if you're seeing someone for the first time and probably the last time, I think it's almost easier in a way to be vulnerable with those people because the risks don't seem so high. It's like, yeah, I don't care what this person's going to think of me if I tell them this because I'm never going to see them again.
Versus, like, I don't have to see them again if they take this really poorly or they don't agree with me.
Yeah. So like we're living in like a pretty small town now where it seems like you run into people all the time. And like, if you grew up here and know everyone, it seems like you walking down the street and running into people all the time. Being vulnerable in a situation like that is tough because you tell one person, it's going to get out. Everyone's going to know. You're going to worry about what people are thinking more. So I think it's easier to take those first steps in challenging that fear of being vulnerable while you're traveling versus being at home.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's also one thing that we were talking about, and I kind of touched on this with Rory when we talked 2 weeks ago, is traveling is actually really great for overcoming, I want to call them like physical fears. Like for example, being afraid of heights. And I think those fears are kind of manifested because of the way you grew up. It's almost like, oh, like, hi, my name's Amanda. I'm Canadian. I'm 25. I'm afraid of heights, which I'm actually not really afraid of heights, but it just becomes this sort of like sticker on your identity of something that you are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like, it's like, oh, I'm afraid of heights instead of like, oh, I have this fear that I want to work to overcome. It's just like, oh no, like so-and-so is afraid of heights. It's just like a thing that you are.
Yeah.
And I think when you travel, you have this anonymity. Is that a word? Anonymousness? No, it's somewhere in between the two. It's not anonymousness. It's like anonymity. Okay.
Is that what you said the first time?
I think so.
Okay.
I'm just going to restate that. So when you travel, you're anonymous and you don't have any of these things attached to you. I mean, I could introduce myself as Barbara, Michaela, Sarah. Like, people don't know who I am. Like, I don't have that sticker on me when I'm traveling. So it's a lot easier to overcome those fears, I think.
Yeah. It's funny, like, you talking about the labels of being afraid of heights. Like, if you're a human being who is, like, fairly like if you don't have like severe development problems and you're like put on a cliff ledge, you're going to be stressed. Like you're going to have a stress reaction. Your body's going to be like slightly freaking out. It's going to be like
sweaty palms,
sweaty palms, that stuff. So that's natural. Obviously there's going to be a spectrum of how intense that stress reaction is. But then people label it as this like binomial thing where you're afraid of heights, you're not afraid of heights. It's like, there's not like a switch. If you're people who would say that they're not afraid of heights, if you put them in a situation like that, yeah, they're going to have a stress reaction. People who are afraid of heights also having a stress reaction. So what's the actual difference? I think it's just people have told them they're afraid of heights, or like you're a child and you hear, oh, my dad's afraid of heights. And you're like, I want to be like my dad. I must be afraid of heights. Or
it's people get like, parents are like, oh, it's genetic. Like your dad's afraid of heights. Like you're afraid of heights too, because your dad's afraid of heights. And that's not a thing. That's a thing that was just like told to you.
Yeah.
I think too, it's also, maybe one for you is, it's like, I'm Ryan, I'm shy.
Yeah, I think it's the exact same thing.
Like being shy it's not like a part of who you are. Like you can choose not to be shy. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. I'd agree. And I don't know if it's like, maybe we should have like an introversion, extroversion and traveling podcast episode, because I really come to believe that those aren't actual things. Like all my life, I've believed, and people kind of reinforced it, this idea of being shy, of being an introvert, as if that's some like inherent trait of a personality. And I really don't see it like that. I think for me, I was really stressed out in social situations because I was afraid of upsetting people because of things about the way I grew up. So as I work on those issues, I naturally become more extroverted because I'm less afraid to be myself, less afraid to express myself. I take emotional risk easier versus being in a situation where I take no emotional risk at all.
Yeah.
And I think extroversion, it's the same thing. It's just like a different result of childhood, basically.
Yeah. And I was going to say, so I've been labeled more on the extroverted side. And for me, that's been, it's like, okay, like this is Amanda. Has brown hair and she's extroverted. So then it's something for me that it's, okay, I'm expected not to have social anxiety because I'm an extrovert. Oh, I'm expected to talk a lot because I'm an extrovert. Whereas, like, yes, I like to interact with people, but I also love to curl up in my bed with a good book and enjoy peace and quiet, or take a bubble bath and not be interrupted. Like, but it's this label's put on me, and then it makes I feel guilt when I get in a social situation and I actually just want to listen.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, what's wrong with you? Like, why aren't you talking tonight? And it's like, well,
it's like people put the labels on you to characterize the way you are, but it's almost like it works the other way around, where they're like, oh, Amanda's like this. And then so you think, oh, I'm this. I've got to act like this.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That was a really good tangent off of what we were talking about.
But I do feel like it all kind of relates.
Yeah, no, I mean, so I guess to relate that back to fear for myself, it's like I have this label of being extroverted. So all my friends are doing something and they have this expectation of me, like, oh, she's extroverted. She talks a lot. Life of the party. And it's like, I'm in the mood for a bubble bath with a good book followed by my PJs in bed. And then I go out and I don't really want to talk very much. And then it's, well, like, people have different expectations. So it's not really acceptable. And traveling, you can really be yourself. Like people don't know you. They don't hold you to these expectations. You can overcome these fears while you're away. I think that's what I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Your social group makes you more afraid of challenging the labels that they put on you. You kind of naturally fit that slot that they've put you into. And when the people in front of you are just kind of moving like a revolving door, like new people every day, you really start to just be yourself, because it doesn't matter what these people who are constantly moving past you think.
Yeah.
And in like the greater schemes of things, the people who are, every person is just moving past you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's like a busy highway of people. Going back to fear of heights though. So one thing for me is I've sort of always been like enjoyed adrenaline activities. I loved roller coasters as a kid. And then, so I actually got the label of like fearless. It's like, oh, like Amanda's fearless. She'll do anything. And so I've always wanted to bungee jump and skydive, but I mean, I'm human. I don't want to die. So it's like standing on a platform about to throw myself into a canyon attached to a small rope. It was actually really terrifying for me. And that was,
which is like, it's fairly
it's
understandable.
Completely human, but I kind of felt this need to, sort of pretend that it wasn't scary for me, I guess.
Like play it cool.
Yeah. Cause it's like, oh, this is like Amanda. She's fearless. She'll do anything. Like, I mean, I am totally into trying new activities, especially adrenaline things. It's one thing that I really do love about myself is I kind of seek that adventure, but I do feel fear. 100% I feel fear for things like that.
Yeah, I think, and it's like I kind of am in a similar position where like I do feel like I have a fear of heights, but then like don't tell people. So I'm like, there's someone like, oh, are you afraid of heights? No. And then like I start, we went rock climbing and I look down and like, oh, palms start sweating. And then I'm like, oh, maybe I actually do have a fear of heights, as if it's like a thing you can have versus just being like a natural spectrum that's there, and that stress reaction is going to move to be less intense the more often you do the thing. Yeah,
definitely. It was super interesting talking to Rory because we talked about sort of that label, and he's had that label on him. It's like, oh, like I'm Rory, I'm from Australia, I have a fear of heights. And so for him going over to New Zealand, he was like, you know what, like, yeah, I was really scared of heights when I was little. Like heights do give me a stress reaction. I'm human, but I'm going to go bungee jumping because it's going to be really cool to kind of overcome this. And that's one thing that I think is really great about traveling is you really have these opportunities to break down those fear barriers. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah. And I think we kind of talked about it before we did the podcast about how your social circle kind of helps you not push your boundaries. So like with the fear of heights thing, if he's at home, no one's ever going to ask him if he wants to go bungee jumping, even though that's an option there, because they're like, oh, Roy's got a fear of heights. I don't know. Maybe someone would ask him, but probably not. Versus when you're traveling and you're meeting new people, you get kind of a stronger push to do activities that maybe you wouldn't want to do because like, oh, you know, everyone from the hostel is going to go out and do this bungee jumping thing tomorrow. Do you want to come?
Yeah.
So it's easier for you to do it than if at home you've got to like do the research and really like put a ton of effort into breaking your fear versus like making one snap decision because other people are helping to push you into it because they don't know anything about you.
Yeah, for sure. And travel too is really, it helps you to really just like live in the moment and not overthink things or overanalyze things. It's just, you know, you can really just do things out of whim, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can go to New Zealand and just arrive in Queenstown. Like we just kind of like pulled up to the bridge bungee and it was like, okay, who wants to bungee jump today? And my instant reaction was like, what? I haven't had time to like mentally, physically, emotionally prepare for this. And it's like, well, like we're here. You either do it or you don't.
Yeah.
Like
and
decide right now.
I think like it's so much easier to face fears in like an acute stress situation versus like a chronic stress situation. And what I mean by that is, so with trying to get over social anxiety, I've put myself into some situations where I'm going to challenge myself to get over fears. So one of them was like asking for 10% discounts at coffee shops. So it's like you were like, okay, I'm going to ask for a 10% discount at this coffee shop, which is kind of a weird thing to ask at a coffee shop. but you feel the stress build up in like the 30 seconds before you go in, you order, you ask your question. It feels awkward for a second. You probably get 10% off because it seems like people give you discounts.
You did at least.
And then you leave and you get this like rush of excitement. So it's all compressed into a short time. It's not like another situation was trying to work in a customer service job to get over social anxiety. And if I'm stressed out by people, serving customers for 8.5 hours, it gets overwhelming.
Yeah.
So like the bungee jumping, if you're thinking about it, like, oh, am I going to go bungee jumping? It's on your mind for like days. It's like harder to overcome that stress versus like, oh, we're here at the bungee jump. You can do it in like 3 minutes if you want.
Yeah. No, definitely. It's a good way to just overcome that fear for sure. So you kind of brought up an interesting point with your job and asking for that discount. We've talked so much in this podcast about how traveling is really big for overcoming fears. And I think traveling is that gateway for overcoming fear. But you don't have to live your life constantly traveling to overcome those fears. It's sort of, like we keep saying, maybe it's the sort of overarching theme of the podcast. The more you do things, the easier it becomes. And we've traveled for 12 months in total, and we've pushed ourselves to overcome a lot of fears. And then it's, you're able to bring those things home and be like, I'm going to continue pushing through these things. And one of the things I like to live by is like scare yourself once a day in some way. And like one thing that I'll just share that was a little thing a few weeks ago is I went to CrossFit for the first time. And it sounds super ridiculous for people who don't go to CrossFit all the time, but I like yoga. I like that yoga is individual and it's quiet and I'm confident doing it. And for a lot of people, yoga might be scary, but for me, it's not. But CrossFit is terrifying to me. So I think that it's important to keep in mind that you can bring those things home with you and continue to push yourself to overcome fears.
Yeah. You can do all the stuff you can on the traveling side of things, you can do at home pretty much. Like you can go to the neighborhoods of your city that you're kind of afraid to be in and walk around and realize there's nothing to be afraid of there.
Yeah, for sure.
I guess the one thing you can't get at home is this kind of sense of the world not being this like crazy place that you should be afraid of.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of media stuff about countries being like really scary places, and they try to separate people in other places from the people here at home. Like, for example, like right now, the thing is with Islam and Muslim people. I don't know if that's the right way to say it. Yeah.
People of a Muslim religion.
Yeah, but like the media tries to play it up as if they're somehow different than we are. And I heard the funny stat about how in Iran, I think 3 of the 5 most popular websites are porn websites. So this is in like a, hardcore Muslim country. What are people doing? They're just like looking at their computers, jacking off. Like it's the same thing everywhere. Like they're just people like us. And by traveling, you really realize that the fear that the world is this like dangerous place and you're like in this island of safety and we've got to protect our island because the scary world is coming to get us isn't true. Like the world by and large is full of like pleasant people who just want to go about their days and like enjoy themselves. Except there's like a few psychopaths.
I think like the general theme of that, aside from the pornography, is that the basic theme is that everyone all over the world is jacking off and everything is covered in semen.
Jacking
off. We're gonna have to mark this as explicit now. Everybody is just searching for happiness
or porn on the internet
or happiness.
Yeah, one or the other. So anyways, the genesis of this talk was a blog post I wrote on our website, theworldwanderers.com. It's called Overcoming Fear by Traveling, I think.
Overcoming Fear Through Travel?
Yeah, that one. So if you want to go check that out and leave a comment, that would be awesome. Or don't. That's cool. And if you have any other feedback, let us know on our website or our email.
the World Wanderers podcast at gmail.com. And you can check out the show notes after the episode's published at theworldwanderers.com.
Yeah. Thanks
for listening.
Bye.